Good afternoon, everybody, and you're welcome to this latest webinar from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine on the EU Deforestation Regulation. We're continuing the series of webinars that we've been holding over the last number of months, as well as the in-person contact that we've had and engagement that we've had in more recent times with stakeholders in Back Weston. This is just today to give obviously a further update on developments as far as the preparations for the coming into effect of the EU Deforestation Regulation is concerned. And as previously, we'll be giving people the opportunity to submit questions on the questions box on your screens, and we'll try and respond to those as best we can over the course of the webinar today. We'll give immediate responses to those that we can, and in other cases we'll take away and consider and put together replies, and we'll update our frequently asked questions on the department's website, and we'll be in touch maybe directly with people as appropriate if we need to in terms of follow-up on questions as well. So again, it's a general update in terms of where we currently stand on the deforestation regulation. So we're joined by a number of colleagues to help us just to outline where things currently are, and after I'm finished these introductory remarks, I'll be handing over to my colleague Patrick Nulty from the department, who will give an update on the most recent developments of the regulation from an EU perspective, and obviously the deferral of the coming into effect of the legislation until the end of 2025 is the primary focus there. We will then have a couple of presentations from colleagues, one from Joe Hendrick from Revenue and Customs in relation to the customs aspects of the deforestation regulation, and then from my colleague here in DAFM, Kay Coakley, on rubber. We were looking at the various commodities over the last number of months. We're going to focus on rubber today and what the implications are from the point of view of that particular commodity. And then after those two presentations, we'll open up to questions and comments from stakeholders, as I mentioned, and then I'll close off a little bit later on. Probably it should take about an hour or so altogether. So as I mentioned, as we go through the presentations, and particularly when we come to the questions and comments later on, you might just submit your questions in the questions box or tab on the side of your screen. If you wouldn't mind, don't put them into the chat function, because that doesn't kind of stay. We're not able to capture that or keep that as a record afterwards. If you put them into the questions, we'll be able to follow up and take each of those questions in more detail and provide updates on the website, as I mentioned. So please put your questions in on the questions tab. So with that, I'm going to get straight into the first substantial item on the agenda then, which is the update and the EU update as far as most recent developments on the regulation are concerned. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Patrick Nulty, to give you an update on that. Patrick.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, I'm just going to give an update on some of the recent developments at EU level in respect of the EU Deforestation Regulation, and I suppose the most prescient development is in relation to the 12-month deferral of the entry into application date of the regulation. So many of you on the call today will know that the European Commission published the necessary legislation required to defer the entry into application of the regulation by 12 months from the 30th of December 2024 to the 30th of December 2025, with an additional 6 months lead-in time for small and micro enterprises. That decision requires ratification by both the European Council and the European Parliament, and both those institutions have confirmed that they've reached agreement on the text of that legislation last week. And so the European Council have already approved the deferral, and it will be ratified by the European Parliament this week, and we don't anticipate any deviation from that. So I think we can assume for our conversation today that that deferral will be in place for 12 months. The second update I'd like to give is in relation to the European Commission's information system. That information system went live on the 6th of November, and operators can now register with the system. We do know, and I've heard from our side, there have been some teething problems with it. So if you're an operator that has registered or has tried to register and encountered any issues, by all means, share that feedback with us and we'll pass it on to the Commission. In relation to the information system as well, we made you aware of several training dates on the information system that the Commission made available in recent weeks. We also understand that demand for those training dates was incredibly high and registration was completed very, very quickly. So we will continue to encourage the European Commission to provide more ongoing training dates going into the new year, given the very, very high demand that seems to be out there right across all 7 commodities from operators and traders. And the third and final piece of information I'd like to share with you today is that the fourth iteration of the European Commission's frequently asked questions on the regulation, we understand, is expected in February 2025. And these new FAQs will focus on 2 separate thematic areas. One will be issues in relation to customs, which dovetails very nicely with our presentation today from our colleagues in revenue. And the second thematic area will be on product specific questions. So I know a lot of operators have been in touch around specific products, whether it's used tires, whether it's wooden barrels, or whether it's pallets and various other products. So we have heard from the Commission that they're going to focus on product specific questions in the next set of FAQs in February. So that should be very, very useful both for us as competent authority and hopefully for you as operators and traders. So thank you very much. That's the main updates on the EU side from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Patrick. Sorry, apologies, just had a slight problem with the camera there. So yeah, thanks very much for that, Patrick. I'm going to move on. As I mentioned, we have a couple of presentations from colleagues on particular elements of the legislation, the new legislation. The first one is from our colleagues in Revenue and Customs. So Joe Hendrick is going to give you an outline of the customs aspects of the new deforestation regulation. So I'll hand over to you, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, this is a short presentation just on the key customs aspects and requirements as a result of the implementation of the Deforestation Regulation 2023/1115. Next slide, please, Celine. And the next one, please. Sorry, the previous one there, Celine. So the due diligence statement, the DDS, is mandatory in the customs declaration from the 30th of the 12th, 2025. This will require that the due diligence statement reference number and the relevant tariff type document code is to be entered on the customs declaration, both at import and export. The DDS and the tariff document type codes to be entered in data element 203 of the customs import declaration or data element 1203 of the customs export declaration. Where exemptions apply under the regulation, the relevant tariff document type codes are declared again in data element 2.3 for imports and data element 1204 for exports of the relevant declarations. These fields must be completed for the customs declaration to be accepted in the revenue import or export system, which is AIS, Automated Import System, or AES, the Revenue Automated Export System. So if the code, if there'd be a business rule, there's a requirement for the codes for the products in scope. If the relevant DDS is not declared or the relevant exemption code is not included, well then the customs declaration itself won't be accepted in either of our import or export systems. Next slide, please, Celine. The relevant codes for the goods in scope are as follows. So for the due diligence statement itself, it will be tariff document code C716, and that will be included along with the reference number of the statement from the information system. Where the exemptions apply, so Y129 is a code to be included for goods other than those falling under the provisions of the regulation on deforestation and forest degradation. So there may be goods that fall into a CM code that's covered by the regulation, but those particular products may not actually, specific products may not actually be in scope of the regulation. So in those situations, you would use Y129. Y132 is exclusion from the scope of the regulation by virtue of the exemption included in paragraph 2 of Article 1. Next slide, please, Celine. Furthermore, then Y133 is an exemption from the provisions of the regulation by virtue of the second explanatory paragraph of Annex 1. So they're goods produced from material that has completed its life cycle. Y141, exemption for operators as defined in Article 38.3 of the regulation. Y142, exemption for non-commercial activity as defined in Article 2. And then C717 is the reference number of the due diligence statement previously submitted, in accordance with the provisions of Article 4, paragraph 8 of the regulation. Next slide, please, Celine. For more information in relation to the goods and scope and the relevant customs requirements and the relevant codes to be used, as I've outlined previously, you can click on this particular link, which will bring you to the EU tariff database, which will show a list of all requirements under any prohibition or restriction. But in this case, if you're following up on the customs requirements for the deforestation regulation, and we'll give an example of that in a few moments. Next slide, please, Celine. So once the provisions of the regulation come into force, Revenue, in conjunction with DAFM, will apply the import-export controls to ensure that goods and scope are being declared correctly and the relevant codes are being entered into the customs declarations correctly. These controls will verify that the due diligence statement will target the correct use of the various tariff document codes at both import and export. From the 30th of June 2028, the deforestation regulation will become part of the EU single window for customs, whereby the due diligence statement will be automatically routed to DAFM for verification, and only once it's verified by DAFM will the goods actually be released and the customs declaration be released. So that will come in on the 30th of June 2028, and I don't believe that the delay in implementing the regulation by 1 year will affect that date at this stage. So Celine, if we can bring up with the page, the web page that I referred to earlier, please. There. I think there's a couple of other screens open there, Celine. So this is an extract from the tariff, and it refers to a particular CN code. And as you will see, it shows in tariff database that this CN code is subject to the provisions of the deforestation regulation. And it sets out there below the relevant tariff codes that must be entered on the declaration when importing products of this type. So obviously, if you have your due diligence certificate, you will enter the relevant code C716. However, if you are entitled to one of the exemptions, you would enter one of the other codes that is listed there below. These codes are exclusive, so you would only enter one of those additional codes that are mentioned there on that particular page. you wouldn't be selecting more than one. So C716, if where you have the due diligence statement and the reference number, or alternatively one of the Y codes where you're claiming the relevant exemption. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if possible.
Thanks for that, Joe. Thanks for that, and we will come back to questions that anybody might have later when we come to that part of the agenda, as I mentioned earlier. So before that, though, we'll have a second presentation from another of my DAFM colleagues, Kay Coakley, on rubber and what the particular specificities are of the regulation in relation to rubber and rubber products. So can I hand over to you, Kay?
There now. Can everybody see me okay and hear me okay? Great. This is just thanks, Paul. Okay, so the deforestation regulation really is about deforestation and forest degradation being such important drivers of our climate change and biodiversity crises. 90% of deforestation is driven by the expansion of agricultural land, and in some instances to facilitate commodity production. As major consumers of the 7 commodities within regulatory scope, the EU introduced the requirement for only deforestation-free goods to be placed on the market as follows. So goods produced within the EU and goods imported into or exported from the EU market. To effectively achieve this goal, the obligation lies with each holder of a relevant good in the supply chain. Sorry, I just need to move that. Relevant good within the supply chain to ensure that the goods placed on the market and entering and leaving it are associated with a valid due diligence statement, and that the assurance of a nil or negligible risk assessment is warranted. A due diligence statement, or a DDS as I'll refer to it from here on, is required in respect of products associated with each CN code, and Annex 2 outlines the information to be contained in the DDS. I've included here a list of everything under the rubber element of Annex 1, so you'll have that. I'm not going to go through it here. You'll receive a copy of the presentation after the webinar, so you'll have it there to refer to it. Just to explain that the X before the CN code of products means that the product described in the annex is an extract from all the products that can be classified under that CN code. If the relevant product, for example, 4011 new pneumatic tyres of rubber, is made from a mix of synthetic and natural rubber, then the operator or the non-SME trader has to exercise due diligence only for the natural rubber ingredient. The primary due diligence requirement is to ensure that the rubber commodities and products have been legally produced in compliance with the national legislation of the country of production, and also sourced from land that has been deforestation free since the 31st of December 2020. The obligation to complete the DDS in the first instance lies with the first point of contact within the EU, or the operator or importer of the rubber products. The importer must collect information to enable the assessment of risk and to ensure traceability, including geolocation. Sorry. There we go, apologies. The geographical location of the plot of land must be described by latitude and longitude coordinates. It must correspond to at least 1 latitude and 1 longitude point, and when plots exceed 4 hectares, polygons must be used with sufficient latitude and longitude points to describe the perimeter of each plot of land. This information must be entered on the EU information system and must be available before products are placed on the market. The information must be retained and available for at least the following 5 years. The DDS must be accompanied by a declaration by the operator that the operator exercised due diligence and that no or only a negligible risk was found. In regard to operators established in third countries that are placing product on the market in the EU, Article 7 of the EUDR states that where a natural or legal person established outside the Union places relevant products on the market, the first natural or legal person established in the Union who makes such relevant products available on the market shall be deemed to be an operator within the meaning of this regulation. The downstream operator or trader must undertake due diligence. The obligation to provide a due diligence statement can also fall to a non-SME downstream operator or manufacturer and to a non-SME trader or EU retailer. Taking certain products in scope as an example, an operator imports natural rubber, CN code 4001, into the EU and submits the DDS to the information system. The manufacturer produces various rubber goods so that the natural rubber commodity has been transformed into various rubber products, which, if in scope of Annex 1, will need a DDS per product code. The manufacturer is now responsible for the submission of a DDS applying to placing the product on the EU market. They can refer to previous DDS, but they must ensure that the DDS was carried out correctly. The EU retailer who places the product on the EU market must file a DDS, but can refer to previous DDS and must again ensure that the DDS was carried out properly. There is provision for operators and traders to mandate an authorised representative to submit the DDS on their behalf. In so doing, however, they must retain responsibility for the obligation to only place deforestation-free goods on the EU market and for the assurance that the goods were produced in conformity with the legislative requirements of the origin country. Traders that are SMEs shall only make Annex 1 products available on the EU market if in possession of the DDS information mentioned above, which they must retain for at least 5 years and must provide to the competent authorities upon request. Traders, for example, retailers who are SMEs, are not required to submit a DDS, but they must collect and maintain the relevant associated information received from the operators and/or traders who have supplied the products, including DDS statements and reference numbers. Where the rubber commodity that's first imported into a member state is transported to another member state, the recipient in the second member state can rely on the information obtained by and from the first importer to the Union market, but they must be satisfied that there is appropriate assurance on the DDS. Now, this is an example of a kind of, a sample workflow. I've just included it here, and when you get a copy of the presentation, you'll have it to refer to, but I'm not going to go through it here. So DAFM are engaging with stakeholders, and we're endeavouring to contact as many stakeholders as possible, identifying large importers and supply chain processes. We're engaging with the European Commission and also engaging, as you've already heard, with the revenue commissioners. We recommend that you engage with members of your supply chain to assist in establishing the availability of the required information and ease of access to geolocation coordinates. And you can contact us with any queries you have. Our email, specified rubber email, is there, eudrrubber@agriculture.gov.ie. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kay, and thanks, Joe, as well for your earlier presentation. So I'm going to go to questions in a moment to see what particular issues people want to have raised. But maybe just before I do that, if I could, I'm not sure if people can still hear me okay, can they?
Can hear you, Paul.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I lost the screen there, sorry, apologies for that. Just on the revenue presentation, Joe, because I think we had a question there come up in relation to putting the Tariq Code website address into the chat, and we can certainly share that link. We can put that into the chat, maybe Bart, and we can share that link in any event afterwards with everybody. But just maybe to clarify, when we talk about the relevant codes for the goods in scope, and we talked about C716 and Y129, you gave an example there, Joe, of the list from the or the extract from the list of goods in scope. I think the intention there, in a practical sense, the intention there is that operators would insert those codes as appropriate into revenue system. Is that right? To confirm that a due diligence statement has been submitted as appropriate, or if there's an exemption from the need to actually produce that due diligence statement. Is that right? And maybe Joe, if you could just elaborate on that, just in terms of the process from, say, from an importer's point of view.
Sorry, Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah, Joe, is that you there? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was having problems with my sound there. Yeah, so the process is that when you're bringing in these products, you have to submit a customs declaration, or exporting them from Ireland. So you have to complete a customs declaration. So it's done electronically through our systems, a automated import system for imports, automated export system for exports. And from the time of the implementation of the regulation, once it comes into force, we say post 30/12/2025 at this stage, you will complete your customs declaration as normal electronically. But because you're bringing in goods now that are subject to the deforestation regulation, you must reference your due diligence statement. So you will do that in data element 2.3, for instance, of the import declaration, using the code C716 and the reference number of the due diligence statement. So it will be an additional piece of data you'll have to include when you're completing your customs import or export declaration. And if you don't have the due diligence statement, you're entitled to one of the exemptions. You have to put in then the relevant code for whatever exemption you're claiming.
Okay, so that's fine. So it's effectively on the customs declaration that you're essentially confirming that you have a due diligence statement, or there is a due diligence statement there in terms of entry of C716, and then the reference number then will be added to that in terms of completing the customs declaration as far as that particular imported good is concerned.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, thanks for that, Joe. And we'll try and make that web link available. We'll be sharing the presentations in any event with everybody afterwards, and we'll make them available on the department's, on the website, on the FAQs section of the website. So you should be able to get access to that link without any difficulty. If we can, we'll try and make that available in the chat or in the questions box in the meantime, so that people can see that. But in the meantime, we might just take some of the questions that have been submitted in the course of the presentations there. So there are a couple here, and I'll ask colleagues to comment as appropriate as we go through them. David Simner had a question there around whether the DDS needs to be completed for every line and every trailer movement or shipment from the UK into the EU. I'll be sending EUDR products up to 15 trucks per day, 7 days a week for the same product. So I think on that one, I know colleagues, maybe Patrick or others, I think in terms of the DDS, we need to, every consignment coming in would need to have a DDS associated with that. Isn't that correct?
I can jump in here, Paul. Yeah, and this is addressed in the frequently asked questions, and the Commission have clarified that one due diligence statement can cover multiple consignments once the appropriate quantity and other relevant information required on the due diligence statement is correct and accurate. And just for information, a draft due diligence statement is included in Annex 2 of the regulation, which I would encourage operators to look at. So just to confirm there that, you know, a due diligence statement can cover multiple consignments, and that's set out in the most recent frequently asked questions provided by the European Commission.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So again, if people can consult the FAQs on the Commission website, they'll get more details on that. I've covered the point there in relation to the sending of the Tariq Code website address into the chat, so we'll try and do that. Danny and Koivu also had a question there in terms of the DDS reference number, the tariff number, assuming that no further controls on the customs declarations is required, i.e. customs wouldn't review the geolocation, etc. I think that's correct, Joe, isn't that right? You just want to check that there is actually a due diligence statement there, and then it's up to the relevant competent authority then to carry out any post-release checks as appropriate.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. Judy Walsh also then had a question of whether there are any requirements around appointing an independent auditor to assess the due diligence system. Are there specific auditors that must be used? I'm not sure about the question about appointing an independent auditor. I don't know if colleagues can maybe answer that question in terms of the assessment of the due diligence system. I don't think that that's necessarily a requirement, but maybe somebody can clarify that.
I can jump in here, Paul, if you like. I think that the question might refer to monitoring organisations, and so it is possible under the EU Deforestation Regulation for operators to engage with monitoring organisations, which are essentially companies that can help them put together their due diligence systems. However, it is important to recognise that that does not mean that the legal obligation on the accuracy and efficacy of the due diligence statements doesn't deviate from the operator placing the relevant commodity on the market. In terms of inspecting operators and non-SME traders' due diligence systems, that will be done by the competent authority, i.e. DAFM in this case, and as mentioned in the previous question, that's done on a post-release basis based on a risk assessment of all the operators in importing or exporting relevant commodities.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. The next question I had there was from Ryan Allender, where the question is, when we enter the DDS on the customs dock, what checks are made, please? And I think, again, that gets back to the point earlier, which is that customs are essentially checking for the presence of a due diligence statement there, and that there's a reference number to that effect. And then the controls that are carried out are at the discretion of the competent authority, obviously, in terms of the post-release checks. But I think, would there be a distinction there, maybe, Joe, just in terms of if a product is coming from, say, a high-risk country, are there situations or occasions where there might be a check conducted at the point of entry by revenue and customs, for instance?
Yes, that's correct. I think I mentioned it that we will be verifying the DDS in conjunction with yourselves, but there is the scope there for further import-export controls to make sure that anything coming from a high-risk country is examined and may be examined, and not alone the due diligence certificate, but also the goods in question as well. We do have that scope.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Next couple of questions, I think related, from Ronan Dobra. Is it a DDS per line item or for the whole DDS? I'm just wondering, I think that might be per individual product or for a whole consignment, which I think has been covered by Patrick already. But the next one was in relation to what occurs with intrastat movements where a customs declaration doesn't arise. I don't know, Joe, maybe could you comment on that one, or is there a particular point in relation to intrastat movements?
My understanding is that that's intra-EU movements. I could be wrong there, but so I don't think there's a requirement for a due diligence statement, and there'd be no customs controls for intra-EU movements. But if that's my understanding, maybe it's to do with something else. Yeah,
I'm not sure what exactly. Well, certainly even movements within the EU will be subject, I think, to due diligence requirements. But I'm not sure whether that intrastat is in relation to intra-EU movements. I don't know whether other colleagues on the call from DAFM's point of view might be able to comment on that.
Hello, Paul. Yeah, just to confirm that domestic producers of the relevant commodities will have to submit a due diligence statement, but obviously there is no customs element to the inspections regime that the competent authority will put in place in such a scenario. But both EU and non-EU operators must submit due diligence statements. That's a requirement of the regulation.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. The next question, I think, might be one for you, Joe, from Judy Walsh. If using a customs broker, will they only require the DDS and tariff type number, or will they need access to the due diligence system documentation? I think probably the first part of that is the correct one, but maybe you could comment on that, Joe.
Yeah, no, as far as I'm aware, on the customs declaration, we'll only be verifying the existence and the reference number and the relevant CN code. We won't be looking for anything else within the information system.
Okay, thanks, Joe. The next question was from Conor McSwiney about how often do we need to update the DDS, and will this update give us a new DDS reference number? I think really the DDS travels with the product until such time as that product is transformed into another product covered by the annex, at which point it's a new product being placed on the market, and a new DDS then would have to be produced in respect of that. So I think in a nutshell, that's the kind of the requirement under the regulation. So again, Patrick, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. It's effectively the DDS goes along until that product is transformed.
Yes, Paul, that's correct. So if you imagine in a supply chain, once there's a relevant CN code, it's the first entity who places the product on the EU market who is the operator. Anyone who buys or sells that product subsequently is a trader, and where that product undergoes what's called a substantial transformation, and essentially its CN code is altered or changes. So this could happen with wood products, it can happen with any one of the 7 commodities, maybe from live cattle into beef, for example. Then a new due diligence statement will be required by what's called the downstream operator. However, it is important to remember that downstream operators in such a scenario will be able to refer to previous due diligence statements, such as in respect of accessing geolocation data.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. The next question we have is from Maria Smith about does the one DDS cover multiple products from one operator or trader? I think, if I'm not mistaken there, that the DDS, there would have to be a separate DDS covering each of the commodities that are covered by the annex. So it would very much depend on what the nature of the consignment is, whether it's a large consignment, multiple products of the same type, or whether there would be different products of different type that would be individually covered in the annex. So I think the key point there would be that the DDS should cover each commodity as covered in the annex. I'm not sure if that might answer Maria's question in full, but I don't know, again, Patrick or otherwise, do you want to add to that?
No, you're correct, Paul. Yeah, you can have multiple commodities on the same due diligence statement, but they all have to have the appropriate information required by the regulation.
Yeah, okay.
I might just come in there, sorry, Paul, as well as Colin here.
Yeah, Colin, go ahead.
I suppose, and it links back to operators being able to submit batch consignments on one DDS, but it's important, I suppose, to remember that the quantity of all the relevant products must be covered by the due diligence statement. So once that quantity or volume has been traded or is on the market, that will trigger the requirement for a new DDS as well. So somebody had asked earlier how long can a DDS last, and that is one of the factors that will determine how long your due diligence statement will last, is essentially what volume you put in the DDS, in the due diligence statement. Once that's on the market, then a new due diligence statement is required. And the FAQs also say that a due diligence statement shouldn't cover batches or multiple shipments for a longer period than 1 year. So really that's the longest time that a due diligence one due diligence statement should last.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I think the next one might be for you, Joe. I think from Tom Thornton. He talks about in Annex 1, rubber products under TARC 4005 shows X 4005. Can these products avail of Y129, or does the importer need to set out if Y129 can apply? I'm not 100% sure on that, but maybe does that relate to, again, the codes that have to be inserted on the customs declaration?
Yeah, I think Kay covered this very well in her presentation when she mentioned it and gave an explanation of the X code. So you could have goods which fall into a CN code, which is covered by the regulation, but those particular types of goods aren't actually qualified. That's where you see the EX in front of the in front of the CN code in the annex. So as I think as Kay said it very well, it's an extract from all the products that can be classified under that CN code. So Y129 would be the relevant code for goods that are covered by an EX. Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. The next one then, just a further question from Ryan, a lender, about what about products produced prior to the regulation that are exported after? Will there be a document type for the export declaration to exempt these, please? I don't know, Patrick, is that one that maybe we can answer in terms of the cut-off point as far as the application of the regulation is concerned?
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, so the regulation will apply to consignments of products placed on the market, let's say after the 30th of December 2025. So products placed on the market prior to that are not subject to the requirements to submit a due diligence statement, that are not subject to due diligence. So you can place products that the regulation applies to on the market during the transition period, but they do have to be deforestation free. Colin, I don't know if you want to add anything additional to that question, if we're understanding it correctly.
Yeah, my understanding on top of that, Patrick, is that there will be, and maybe Joe can confirm this, that there will be a tariff code specifically for products that were produced before the date of application of the regulation, but they were placed on the market after that date. So that's my understanding, that there is a specific tariff code for that exemption, for products with that exemption.
Yeah, it's the exemption Y132 that I outlined earlier on, which is the subject to the exemption under Article 1, Paragraph 2. So it's timber products produced before June 23 and placed on the market before the 31st of December 2027.
Okay, yeah, thanks, folks. I think that's clear. The next question we had was from Danny and Koivu again, which is in relation to EU shipments within the same legal entity. An assumption that an EU shipment within the same legal entity shouldn't be considered as making available on the market. And specifically, I'm curious for the tolling agreement models, no ownership change between toller and tollee. Happy to send a more detailed question via email. Maybe that might be a good idea. I don't know, folks, if you want to respond to that right now. I think even though products or consignments might be shipped within the same legal entity, I think once they're being placed on the market, the requirement to have a due diligence statement to go along with them is standard or doesn't change. But do we need to maybe just take that one away and maybe engage directly on that?
Yeah, Paul, that would be great if the stakeholder could send us that question in writing, because I also know that the European Commission is working on a similar question that they've received from stakeholders previously, where, for example, a product undergoes a substantial transformation within an individual company's own production process, but only one version of the product, if you like, is placed on the EU market. So obviously internal processes don't fall within the scope of the regulation because no product has been placed on the market. But there is an FAQ being worked on that, and if the stakeholder could send us their question, we can respond in greater detail. That would be no problem at all.
Okay, and I think that request should come to the central EUDR at agriculture.gov.ie email address. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll pick it up there.
Okay. Okay, then that's great. The next question was from Mark Donnelly about asking whether we'd be doing a raw or roasted coffee specific webinar. I think we might have covered coffee at a previous webinar. Was it back in October? Kay, I think you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong there.
Hi, Paul. Yes, we did coffee and cocoa. I'm not sure if it was the last webinar or the one before that, but the replays of those webinars are on the DAFM webpage, so they can have a look at it there.
Okay, well, that's great. Thanks, Kay. The next question is from William Merivale, a point of information regarding audit. Okay, so I think we might just take that as a helpful clarification there, maybe, if we can on that one, William, if that's all right. And we can get in touch directly if we need to further on that. Judy Walshton had a further question. In the EU virtual training sessions, it was mentioned that the DDS submitted could be reviewed and checked before the DDS is given an available status. Is there any visibility of what these checks entail so that they can be factored into the due diligence statement or system? Again, I don't know, Patrick or Colin, anything that you want to offer on that? I'm not sure specifically whether there's a particular check or other facility envisaged there.
If I understand that question correctly, Paul, I think there's a window of time within which an operator creates a new due diligence statement, and during which time they can work and amend on that due diligence statement before they submit it. I think the Commission have yet to confirm this, that there is also a window of which they can amend the due diligence statement after it's submitted as well. I need to confirm that one myself, but certainly there is a window of time there with which an operator can make changes to the due diligence statement while they're working on it.
Yeah, okay. So it's the facility to commit to start the process, but then not finish it until later on.
Yeah.
Okay, question then from Ger Fox. In effect, with regard to numbers of a product, could importers, I think it's could importers, guess the amount that they're exporting for a year of the same type to get a yearly DDS? Again, Patrick, Colin, I think we're looking at ways to try and simplify, but I'm not sure that we could have a situation where people are kind of guessing on volumes in advance. I think it's more about maybe the location from which the products are coming from that we might be able to facilitate some sort of flexibility.
Yeah, I don't think a guess would meet the threshold for what a due diligence statement should contain. I mean, we are cognizant of the fact that, as I said, a due diligence statement could come in on multiple shipments, and therefore, if you submit a due diligence statement at the start of a given calendar year, that doesn't mean that the entire volume of the product needs to be imported at the same time. And I would draw stakeholders' attention to questions 518 and 519 in the Commission's frequently asked questions, and they deal specifically with batch commodity product submissions. And so there's a much longer and detailed answer there if you look under section 5 of the FAQs under what a due diligence statement should involve and contain.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Another question from Ryan was in relation to wooden pallets. So if the wooden pallets were imported with another product on them, then the wooden pallets are then sold within the EU when the goods in the pallet are consumed. So what circumstances or what requirements apply to those? You mentioned earlier, Patrick, that we expect to see the next iteration of the FAQs from the Commission, I think, is going to cover product-specific questions like pallets and other products, but shall we wait until that FAQ emerges, or is there anything that you want to mention on that right now?
Yeah, as a general rule, one should assume that where the pallet is just in effect packaging, then the EU Deforestation Regulation does not apply. But where the pallet is being placed on the market, i.e. the EU market itself, then the regulation does apply. But I know the industry and stakeholders have highlighted a number of kind of complex case study scenarios where there's an ambiguity there, and I would just ask stakeholders to wait until the frequently asked questions are published in February, because there's going to be a number of questions as we understand it, and we've raised this issue with the Commission as well. It's come up in previous webinars around clarifying certain complex situations, such as, for example, where the pallets are rented. So that is going to be addressed in the FAQs in February. But a good rule of thumb is if the pallet is on the market in and of itself, the regulation applies. If the pallet is just packaging to transport a relevant product, then the regulation does not apply.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Next question we had was in relation to the meaning of products being available on the market. So the example there, if I import a product, for instance, in September 25, but keep it in a warehouse and sell for instance, by February 26, I think that should be, we will need also to apply for a DDS. So if the product is imported in September 25, but kept in a warehouse and sold in February 2026, What do you think on that one again, Patrick? Colin, it's been placed on the market for the first time after the end of December 2025. So that would imply that a DDS would have to be in place for that product, even if it had been imported in September 25. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Joe might come in on this one as well, but once a product has undergone the release for free circulation and it's been imported into the EU market, then it in essence has been made available on the EU market. There is an FAQ on this expected in February as well, so there'll be more detail. But once a product has been imported and released for free circulation, then effectively it is available on the EU market. But I don't know if Joe wants to add anything on that.
It's an interesting one. I'd be interested to see the frequently asked questions on it. So we're equating placing on the market with release for free circulation. And if the goods have been brought into a warehouse, they won't be subject going into the warehouse. Warehousing is a different procedure than release for free circulation, so different rules apply to a certain extent. So, but when the goods are released for free circulation, and as far as I can see, if that's after the implementation of the regulation, well, then those goods will require a due diligence cert. I don't see any exemption for goods that would be under a previous customs procedure.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. Next question from Thomas Ichatsu in regard to rubber products, about justifying whether they're made of synthetic rather than natural rubber, that there's no distinction of the tariff code in those cases. So I don't know, Kay or perhaps Joe, do you want to comment on that particular question?
Sorry, could you just repeat that one, Paul, if you don't mind?
Yeah, it was regarding rubber products. How do you justify your goods are made of synthetic rubber rather than natural rubber? There's no distinction on the tariff code there, so I assume there's something about using the Y codes, but not sure if there's anything on the portal where DDS is submitted that is required to be filled. So I think it's just that distinction between synthetic and natural rubber, and because there's no distinction as far as the tariff codes are concerned, I think, between those two products. Or would that, could that be something maybe we might follow up directly with the question?
We might follow up directly. I'm not sure how that could be done from a customs aspect, but if we may follow up on that one, talk about that one later. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, so maybe if Thomas is still on the call, you might just, as I said earlier, with one or two other questions, if you could address that query to the email at the central email address here, eudr@agriculture.gov.ie, and we'll engage with revenue colleagues and follow up on that for you. And I think the last question then that we have is just whether a recording of this meeting will be sent out alongside the slides. So yes, the recording of the webinar is available on the website, on the Deforestation Regulation section of the department's website. You'll see a recording of the webinar, and you'll also have copies of the presentations that were made today as well. So that's it, I think, in terms of all of the questions that we have on the list so far. I don't know if any colleagues, anybody else on the call, Patrick or Colin or Joe, anything you want to add in respect of any of the questions we've covered so far already?
This is Joe here from Revenue. Just one thing in relation to the link to the TARIC database. Yep. The requirements for deforestation will only appear when you put in the relevant date. So the example I gave was a date in January 2025. But given that this week it's to be deferred for a year, the chances are that those requirements will be removed for 2025, but they should show up if you put a date in forward of 2026.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Joe. Okay, I think that probably just about covers it. I don't see any further questions on the list for now. So look, thanks everybody for joining the webinar this afternoon, and thanks to colleagues, Revenue and DAFM colleagues, for presentations and for picking up on those questions. As I mentioned earlier, we'll put up the recording of the webinar and the presentations on the Deforestation Regulation section of the website. If you wish to, you can continue, and as I mentioned earlier on, the couple of clarifying questions that we mentioned earlier, you could send those to EUDR@agriculture.gov.ie for direct follow-up, just on one or two of those points. that weren't entirely clear maybe from the written questions, we'd be happy to follow up on those. And we'll also update our frequently asked questions, our own frequently asked questions on the DAFM website with replies to the questions that we were presented with today, to the extent that they haven't already been covered on our frequently asked questions section. But that'll be done in the follow-up to today's meeting as well. And look, we'll continue to engage with stakeholders. We'll continue on with the webinars into 2025. We'll be in touch soon on that in terms of our schedule for 2025. And we'll also be continuing with our person-to-person engagement with stakeholders across the various commodities as we get into 25. So we'll be sharing a program of engagement with everybody when we come back early in the new year. So I think that's it. So again, thanks everybody for joining in today, and we look forward to staying in touch. And in the meantime, we wish everybody a very happy Christmas and all the best for 2025. Take care. Bye-bye.